the Baltimore Study of Aging, performed at Johns Hopkins, looked at this, and they looked at men, and they basically saw that men in their 50s had a 9% decline, men in their 60s a 34% decline, by their 70s it was a 68% decline, and by their 80s it was a 91% decline in free testosterone. What are the ways that you can avoid getting to that point, or what are the things you should address first before considering doing testosterone therapy? Because there's a lot we can do to control this within our bodies. And the important things I think to really cover are strength training, sleep, and then diet. And in my belief is that you should really try to work on these three things first and optimize these before jumping on to using testosterone therapy. Welcome to Foundations First, Health, Strength, and Success. We're building tomorrow, starting today, based on scientific evidence. I'm Dr. Patrick Denard, an orthopedic surgeon with an interest in health and wellness. And today's episode is testosterone and avoiding the inevitable decline. Specifically on this episode, we're talking about this for men. We talked about previously for women and the importance of strength training, but men face a unique issue with decline in testosterone. And testosterone is really important because it's linked to mood, it's linked to building muscle, and then of course, sex drive. So how do we avoid this decline that occurs over time? Today's podcast is sponsored by Complete Surgical Nutrition. The average American will have 6 surgeries in their lifetime. Evidence shows that nutrition is an important part of recovery. Supplementation can improve speed of recovery and lower the risk of complications. CSN was formulated by surgeons to help optimize your recovery after surgery. If you or a loved one are having surgery, more information is available at www.completesurgicalnutrition.com. So testosterone plays a critical role in all of these things, and I think it's important to understand how it's produced. So testosterone is produced in the Leydig cells, and that's 10 times the concentration in that area that it's in other areas. And those cells are primarily located in the testes, which is one of the reasons why men have a higher testosterone level than women. But what you see is that if you look at aging, you see a decline in testosterone as we age. So for instance, a study on the Baltimore Study of Aging, performed at Johns Hopkins, looked at this, and they looked at men, average age of 54, ranging from the ages of 20 to 80. And they basically saw that men in their 50s had a 9% decline, men in their 60s a 34% decline, by their 70s it was a 68% decline, and by their 80s it was a 91% decline in free testosterone. And this is one of the reasons why it becomes harder to build muscle with time, and one of the reasons why we really want to try to emphasize building muscle at an earlier age. But when you get a decline in testosterone, you get a drop in mood, again, muscle strength and sex drive, and so you see more and more men starting to take free testosterone or testosterone therapy as a way to overcompensate for this. And I would say I'm certainly somebody who's thought about jumping onto that bandwagon, currently trying to take the best steps I can to sort of delay that until later in life. But I thought it would be good first to look at what are the ways that you can avoid getting to that point, or what are the things you should address first before considering doing testosterone therapy, because there's a lot we can do to control this within our bodies. And the important things I think to really cover are strength training, sleep, and then diet. And in my belief is that you should really try to work on these three things first and optimize these before jumping on to using testosterone therapy. So exercise training, particularly strength training, is one of the most important things we can do to build testosterone levels. For instance, resistance training increases testosterone production by about 25%. And this is one of the big reasons that I'm an advocate of doing strength training in addition to aerobic training throughout all ages of life, for men and women, but particularly for men in the testosterone regard. If you look at that, what happens is that you get an increase after resistance training within 30 minutes, and then you tend to get a decline afterwards. So one of the questions that often comes up for people is, what should I be doing from a strength training perspective? That is, how much should I be lifting in terms of weights? And the data here is a little bit mixed, but overall, what you see is the intensity of the exercise is important. So for instance, one study looked at this, and if one does 6 reps of a 40 to 50% max, you do not get any change in testosterone levels. So you need to be stressing your body to a certain level to actually see this response. Same study, 3 sets of 6 at a 70% max did induce a response with testosterone. So you have to hit this threshold where you're actually getting close to the fatigue point. If you're not reaching that, you're not going to get the testosterone production. And that's going to be different for every person, but I think the point is you have to find where you're getting close to your fatigue level in order to achieve testosterone production. Again, looking at this from another perspective, 5 sets of 10 at a 10 rep max, meaning you fatigue out and 10 is the last you can do, that induces a response. If you go 5 sets of 10 at 40 to 70% rep max, again, you do not get the response. So you have to get close to that level. So the bottom line here is that you have to be close to the max, somewhere between 70 and 100% to get your testosterone production. Now, the other thing that happens there, though, is there appears to be some adaptation. So studies have shown that if you keep it consistent, your body is very adaptable and you stop getting that increase in production. So what I typically recommend for people is that they mix things up. So it might be that one day you go a bit heavier and go up to your max, and another day you may alter that by doing something different, like eccentric exercises where you're doing lighter weights and going really slow, because your body is an adaptation machine, and if you're doing the same thing, you're going to stop getting that same response. So the next topic I want to cover, or intervention you can do, is sleep. Increasingly, we're talking about sleep and effects on mood and energy levels, but it also has a huge impact on testosterone production. And this is one of the reasons why it's really critical that people are getting a sufficient amount of sleep. So a 2024 study looked at the impact of sleep on testosterone levels in nearly 9,000 patients. And what they found was that sleep deprivation, which was defined as less than 6 hours of sleep, was associated with lower testosterone production. That odds ratio was 3.62. What that means is that it was 360% difference in those that were sleep deprived. Additionally, young men ages 20 to 40 and middle-aged men ages 41 to 64 who slept more than 9 hours also had a higher odds ratio of a lower testosterone. It wasn't as much. That odds ratio was 2.0. But again, that's a 200% increase odds of having lower testosterone levels. So that data really just shows that there's this middle ground. You need to get this optimal sleep that probably varies a little bit from individual to individual. You certainly need to be getting more than 6 hours, but it appears somewhere between that 6 and 8 hour window is ideal for people for testosterone production. Now, in terms of diet, there's a lot of impact of what you're eating and your body weight with testosterone production. So for instance, it's been shown that people who have a higher body mass index, and again, body mass index is a reflection of how much you weigh relative to your height. If you don't know what your body mass index is, you can easily go online and find a calculator. I encourage you to do that. We know that the majority of Americans now reach the overweight or obese category. But what happens is when you have more fat cells, you get a decline in testosterone production. And this is one of the big reasons why I'm an advocate of strength training. But along with this is diet. And when you look at diet, there's a couple of interesting things. Number one is that one of the popular things right now is doing restrictive eating, right? So you pick a window where you can only eat in a certain period of time, say 8 hours, formerly called intermittent fasting, but it's probably best referred to as restrictive eating because you're picking a window where you can eat as much as you want. So an example would be somebody eats whatever they want from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., so they have 8 hours, and they don't eat outside of that window. Now, that kind of habit or pattern is pretty successful, actually, in dropping weight, and it's encouraged because there are some studies that have suggested that caloric restriction, and this is one method for caloric restriction, helps improve longevity. However, there are some consequences to this. So what you'll see is testosterone levels, if you're doing restrictive eating, will decline as a result. And I can tell you that I had a period where I was doing restrictive eating, and it was pretty good for dropping my weight, actually a couple of pounds. But what I found is over time, you see that your performance goes down, and it may relate to this drop in testosterone levels. So I noticed, for instance, that I couldn't bike as much on the Peloton, really reinforcing these findings that just I wasn't performing as well. The other thing that kind of goes along with that is it's when we get back to this longevity issue, I think that data people need to recognize is a little bit controversial. So there was a study, for instance, that was done on monkeys at the University of Wisconsin, and that study initially found that the monkeys who had caloric restriction lived longer than the monkeys who were not restricting their calories. And the conclusion was you eat less, you live longer. However, there was a second study that was done at the National Institutes of Health, and that study actually found no difference with monkeys based on caloric restriction. And when you dive into actually what the monkeys were eating, the monkeys at the University of Wisconsin study were having essentially the equivalent to the American diet, which is high sugar, high carbs. And so they were having other diseases that they were dying of and having problems from. So in other words, what we're saying here is that there may be some benefit to the caloric restriction, but probably what's more important is the content of what you're eating. So I am no longer a big advocate of restrictive eating. I think if you're starting your day, particularly with high protein, that's going to help build muscle and maintain that, help your testosterone production stay high, that's going to trump and outweigh caloric restriction in my mind in the active individual. And then, of course, there's the what are you eating in terms of plant-based diet or having an animal diet, all these sorts of diets. Overall, it appears that there's no real difference there. Specifically with regard to testosterone, there does not appear to be a decline with a plant-based diet. So if you're somebody who's, wants to use a plant-based diet, that appears to be totally fine for testosterone levels. What's more important there is just thinking about what you're eating, getting good high-quality protein and the amount that you're eating, because you can certainly be on a plant-based diet and consume too much and become overweight or vice versa. It's more about the content and making sure you're getting the appropriate amount of calories. So now, what are the benefits of maintaining a high testosterone or normal testosterone levels? Well, let's bring this home talking about diet and exercise. So there was a study in 2025, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. This was over 3,000 males in the United States, and they looked at 4 health behaviors, which were nicotine exposure, diet, physical activity, and sleep duration, and 4 health factors, body mass index, LDL, which is measured cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood glucose. And when they looked at all those, serum testosterone levels were associated with all of those. In other words, if you are dieting properly, meaning eating properly, because I don't like to use the term diet, if you're exercising properly, if you're getting good sleep, as we talked about, testosterone levels were higher. The benefit was on those health factors it was associated. So they saw lower glucose levels, which is associated with mortality, lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, and overall, higher testosterone levels were associated with a 40% reduction in cardiac risk over time. So now you might say, well, okay, I just need to take testosterone to lower my cardiac risk, but it's really a chicken or the egg thing right here, because those individuals who have a healthy diet, healthy sleep habit, and healthy pattern of physical activity have higher levels, and those are also going to help drive down their risk of cardiac events and overall mortality. And that, again, is why when I think about trying to consider, or if somebody is considering testosterone replacement therapy, I think what's going to trump all is your diet and exercise. And you should really try to maximize all those things first. And if you've done that and you still have low testosterone levels, then yeah, it may be a consideration to think about replacing, but you want to control those modifiable factors first. They're going to have a big impact on your quality of life. So really what it comes down to is we have to think about what our lifestyle is currently and how we evolved, right? So I like to think about sort of channeling your inner caveman here. You know, if you think back about what we were doing years ago, well, we were having a diet that had high protein. If we were going to go out and be a warrior, we would want to get good sleep that night before so we could go out and perform well in that environment. And it's the same thing here. Unfortunately, we're in a world where we have phones at our disposal. It's very easy for us to grab the easy food off of the vending machine, etc. But if we try to think about channeling what would my inner warrior or caveman want to do, you'd want to be eating high protein foods. You want to be exercising regularly, and then taking it and resting at night, getting proper sleep so you can perform the best. Thank you for joining us on Foundations First. If you are so compelled, please leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube, like, subscribe. On the next episode, we will be talking about protein and separating myths from facts, the data on what type of protein is best for you in terms of maintaining muscle strength.